Welcome to the Codcast. I'm Bruce Moll from CommonWealth, and I'm joined by Steve Poftak, the General Manager of the MBTA. Steve, thanks for coming on the show. It's great to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to try and get a better understanding of your thinking on a handful of issues. And if we could, let's start with this recent brouhaha. It sort of blew up into a big thing, but I'm still trying to understand a little bit with the congressional delegation, their insistence that the T return to full service as soon as possible. It seemed like you were initially resistant to that idea, but then you agreed to do basically what they asked. Can you summarize what changed for you?
Sure. I think, we had started a process in the fall of adjusting service levels. And, we had not yet gotten or didn't have the certainty of the second, third waves of stimulus funding. So when we put that in motion, I think we did it with the best of intentions to try to put the T on a sustainable path. As the second and the third wave of stimulus funding came in, the third wave in particular was the largest of the three, which I think came as a surprise to us. And, the congressional delegation, signaled or told us directly, pretty clearly that the intent of this money was to support as much service as possible, as opposed to taking the money and parsing it out in an attempt to make it last as long as possible. So, after I think some productive discussions, not only with the delegation, but obviously with the board, we've reoriented our efforts to try to bring back service as fast as possible on the bus and subway. We already had plans in flight to increase service on commuter rail, which we did on April 5th. One thing we will be bringing back is weekend service on the commuter rail. We're still working out the details of that. So I think we really reoriented ourselves from trying to husband that stimulus money for as long as possible to bringing service back as soon as we can. So, we are full speed ahead right now. We've got open advertisements out there for bus operators, for rail operators, for bus instructors. So we are very much, in a restoration of service on the bus and subway mode right now.
So, and that makes perfect sense to me, except I think it was Governor Baker who famously said at one point, I don't see the point of running empty trains. And so I know I think what people often have a hard time understanding is the T can't just sort of say, oh, we're going to add a lot more service tomorrow. It takes months to sort of plan with the workforce and build up. And you've had attrition, as you were saying, you are trying to hire people back. But I guess I still wanted to just understand a little bit better. The ridership is still at a relatively low level if you look at the T broadly. And if you bring back service, if you bring back all your service, you're providing more service than you probably need. So I'm just trying to understand, there's a difference between husbanding resources for the future, but also not wasting resources right now when you maybe don't need as much service. That's what I was trying to, there seems to be you're juggling that all the time. I'm just trying to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there. I think there's a sort of, the answer to your question is somewhat embedded in the way you preface the question. The T we're not in a position where I can linearly, tomorrow say we're going to give 10% more service on bus, and then the day after give another 10%, right? The T has long planning cycles. We've got 2,000 people with contractual rights and just the process of scheduling. We do have to be in a position where we are changing service almost in advance of what we think ridership will be. We have seen significant increases in ridership last week. Last week was the highest ridership week since the pandemic started. So we are seeing increases in ridership. I think it's all incremental. It's not as if you wake up one day and there's 10% more riders. But we are seeing people come back slowly but surely, and we've we have the resources in place where we can provide additional service, and that's what we're doing right now.
So, but you still don't know when, I guess last week you're saying it's up, but on a broad basis, it's still what percent of pre-pandemic levels, like 40%, 30%?
Varies by mode. It's probably something along the lines of 30%. On bus, it's more like 45%. Last Friday was actually quite close to 50%. Probably closer to 25% on the subway, with the notable outlier there being the Blue Line, which is at about 43%.
So the struggle is always, are you providing, you're rushing to get the service back now because you have the money, but is that a waste of money because you don't need all that service?
Well, I mean, the other thing I'd note is, the cross-cutting issue here is the issue of social distancing, right? In the old days, a 40-foot bus with 58 people on it was our definition of crowded. Now, our new definition based on the World Health Organization 3-foot perimeter guidance is, 3 feet between individuals guidance, puts that crowding threshold down to 20. So we have to run, we have bus routes where many of the buses fit that definition of crowded, even though we're carrying fewer passengers. And I think it is currently the expectation of our passengers that they will be able to socially distance while they're on the T. And we're trying to distribute the service so that we can do that. We can't always do that given the number of people and just a finite number of resources, finite number of buses. But I think there is, even with a lower ridership level, I think it does make sense for us to support higher levels of service to allow people to distance.
Okay, so, but that would sort of indicate that there'll be this convergence at some point where the emergency is still in place, but more and more riders are coming back. Your existing full service might not even be able to accommodate unless the emergency goes away, right? I mean, I guess I'm trying to read out what happens 4 months, 5 months down the road.
I mean, at some point, the irresistible force meets the immovable object. We've got 1,055 buses. We have roughly, 1,900 people in bus operations to maintain and operate those buses. That's the limit. And as more, at some point, we will hit a tipping point where as more people come back, that finite asset does become more crowded.
Okay, let's move on to another one. I thought I was at the recent Fiscal and Management Control Board meeting, and it was an interesting discussion about means-tested fares. And for our listeners, means-tested fares are fares that are based on the income level of the rider. And as you're aware, a lot of our listeners are aware, there's been a lot of debate about offering free service, no fares. In fact, the Senate chair of the Transportation Committee has filed legislation to offer free bus service. And it's gotten some currency of late. But Crystal Cornegay, a member of the control board, sort of raised the issue that means-tested fares might make a lot more sense because, as she said, I can afford to ride the T and I should pay to ride the T, and others can't. And so it might make sense to adjust fares for them. Is that something that first off, I just wanted to get your sense. You sound like you're pushing ahead with this and trying to come up with a way to measure and handle means-tested fares if that's where the control board wants to go. Are you in support of that? Just tell me how you feel about it.
The means-tested fares is something that we've examined a number of times at the direction of the board. One of my concerns is that it comes with a durable revenue stream, and also that we determine a way, which I don't think we've locked down, but determine a way to handle income verification that doesn't involve the T building that capacity. So, I do think there is, there's additional work that needs to be done. We are, the mayor of Boston has expressed her interest in some sort of pilot related to free bus, and that is something we are actively discussing with them, kind of what the parameters would be and how that potentially would be run. I think internally at the T, the preference, bearing in mind the preconditions that I mentioned, the preference was always to explore. The preference has always been for people-based fare. Types of fare mitigation as opposed to place-based because of some of the issues that Director Cornegay raised. And also, I think some of just the difficulties of implementing, if you make a portion of the bus system free, if those people are getting on the subway, they're paying, the transfer is free, but they're paying for the subway. So they're effectively, they're not really receiving a benefit. So there are some, I think given the work we've done internally, there's a bias to person-based types of fare mitigation versus place-based.
Yeah, the way she phrased it, Crystal Cornegay, it sort of sounded like in a political sense too, that makes a lot more sense from the T standpoint than just free fares, because it's you're not just giving it away to everybody, but you're giving it away to those people, giving a service away to people that actually need maybe some help in paying for it. So with those caveats, the revenue and what have you, the legislature's talked about providing you some revenue for that. None of their measures passed. The governor vetoed them primarily. But I'm curious. They were talking about, I think, fees on rideshare companies and rideshare. Is that something that would be acceptable to you as a revenue source?
I think I confess I did not. I understand at a very surface level not only what the legislature provided in terms of fees, but also what the governor himself had filed. He had filed a different variant of that idea. I think one that was, at a little bit of a higher level, whereas the one that was filed by the legislature, I think, had some very precise targeted pieces to it. I don't frankly know whether that is enough. I don't know enough about the revenue source to know the amount of revenue or whether it would be durable, or particularly kind of in a COVID world with lower levels of ridership, what would that mean in a post-COVID world? So I guess I'm hesitant to endorse that as a revenue source, just not knowing enough about it.
And do you have a sense of, your research on this at the T, has it turfed up how much revenue it would cost? That seems like a big variable that's maybe hanging out there.
It's a big variable because it all depends how you frame eligibility.
Have you guys done that at all?
I know there was some work done about a year and a half ago. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't have a specific. I think you're asking me, what is, how much? What is? Give me the X. What is the cost of a program with the structure around it? I don't know that.
And just, you mentioned that you were talking with the acting mayor of Boston about offering some sort of free bus service. I know she was handing out passes or T cards to people and stuff, but you're actually exploring a route or something specific at this point?
It would be some form of pilot. Really, she has expressed interest in that, and we're trying to sort of flesh out the details of what that would look like. It's still at an early, I would say, at an early stage, but the request has been made and we are working on it.
Okay. And then there was a recent announcement by the T that the fines for fare evasion were being reduced pretty dramatically from what they had been. And this is all sort of leading up to the whole turnover to a new fare collection system, a cashless fare collection system that I think a lot of people are excited to see when it finally arrives and what it's going to look like. I wanted to ask you, so just so people understand what we're talking about, with this new system, you would get on the green line at any bus, you get on at any door, which would speed up getting on board, and you just tap your card getting on and then sit down or go wherever you're going to go. And the T has sort of said we're going to have fare, I don't know what they're called, fare inspectors or fare checkers who would go around and just, I guess, check whether people have paid their fare, but they can look at the card or do something electronically and figure that out.
Yep.
How big of a team are you sort of envisioning for this fare inspection group?
We are envisioning, a team that would probably be somewhere on the order of, I'm going to give you a broad range just to, so I'm not wrong, but something on the order of, say, 80 to 120 people who would be checking primarily in places where we don't have, the fare gates serve as the fare verification mechanism on much of the subway system, except for surface green line stops and obviously the bus system. So that's where their work would be. That's where their work would be concentrated.
And so would these people be dressed in like insignias with T's on their, are they going to be undercover, or what are they going to look like?
It would not be undercover. They would have some, they would obviously have some form of attire that identified them as such. The intent here is not to create a duplicate. We have the transit police. The intent here is not to create another policing mechanism. This would really be more. This would be more fair verification would be their job. We are initiating a dialogue with the community that I believe started last week, and obviously we'll continue with additional outreach to get their feedback on kind of what is the community's expectations around. I think there's some really important equity issues in terms of making sure that we are verifying fares equitably, both even on a vehicle, but also across the system where these folks would be active. Want to make sure that it's done fairly, that it's done in an auditable way so that we can look back. Also would have some type of reporting attached to it. So at a regular cadence, we would report out on what type of fare verification was done, what type of citations were issued, to whom were they issued, just so that, I think we want to make sure that we are working with the communities we serve to make sure that we're treating everybody fairly.
So I'm always trying to get an image in my head of what this might look like. So if I'm thinking of the old pre-pandemic days where the green line gets on and, at times it's pretty crowded, would there be a device that like people would be getting on with their phones, perhaps with cards, all these, but they could go around fairly quickly and check that? Or is it they got to get the card out, feed it into something? Is it more complicated? Well, how quickly could it be done?
I believe you'd have a handheld device that could then verify as it scans your card. It verifies that you had tapped and validated your card as you boarded the vehicle.
So it's a device that they could correctly tap again and it would show you had paid.
Exactly. Yeah.
I got it. Okay. All right. So could someone just go through the car and you think do it in between stops, or is that?
That would roughly be the idea. I think you're probably naturally going to get people who, if it's a very crowded, I'm thinking of a crowded green line vehicle where, you may not be able to make it through. I think what we're trying to build is a culture, we're moving away from this culture of where the operator is the one who is notionally enforcing all the taps as people come through the doors. We're trying to build a culture where everybody taps as they go in, and just the prospect of being checked is enough. that we're trying to get the balance right. That sort of the potential to be checked is enough to incentivize you to tap. If there's many systems in Europe that do this. Kind of in my younger years when I could travel, I lived overseas a couple times, and it was almost universal compliance. Very few people rode without validating the ticket, even though I think in my travels I might have gotten checked a handful of times. But there was a culture of compliance, and I'm also hopeful that people understand the benefit of this, that the ability to have everyone doing all door boarding is going to be such a benefit. The throughput improvements we're going to see on the subway, in particular, the Surface Green Line and the bus system, I think is going to make employees and customers are really going to value this. When I get on the Silver Line and there's, there may only be 20 people boarding, but it may take you 3 or 4 minutes to board, particularly if someone has an issue with, they potentially need to reload their fare media or something. To not have that and have those 20 people get on board in 10 seconds, it's a big gain. It's a big gain in terms of productivity.
So one last question for you, and that's about, you mentioned that commuter rail has expanded its service on April 5th, and it's sort of exciting to watch this. Instead of, just to explain to folks, instead of having a lot of more trains concentrated at the traditional early and evening peak, they're now spread out through the day. So, and you can sort of count on it every hour or every 45 minutes, depending on the line, whatever. I know that started on the 5th, but you're the top guy there. What are you hearing in the first week or so of the operation? Has it been well received, or hard to tell, or what are you hearing?
Oh, people really like it. People really like it. We've seen, in rough terms, I mean, we weren't operating from a huge base, so I don't want to oversell it, but we've seen an uptick in thousands of new riders or riders coming back, even in the first week. So, and partly I think that's a function of the previous service was an emergency schedule. It was a very low level of service and frequency. Just adding frequency alone has brought back riders. I also think this schedule for most riders, not universal, but for the vast majority of riders, there's a real consistency to it now. Your train arrives at the same time every hour, all day. So you can plan, for me now, the train home leaves at 5, 6, 7, 8, it's easy to understand. It's easy to plan your day around. And I think one, that's going to be attractive to people. And two, I think for folks who haven't ridden the commuter rail regularly, now having a schedule that's easy to understand, easy to remember, and kind of integrate into your other activities, I'm hopeful is appealing enough to get more folks back on commuter rail.
And that is one of the modes that has sort of struggled to come back so far during the pandemic. You're hopeful that this will sort of give it a kickstart to get going, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the commuter rails bumped around, 8 to 10% ridership throughout the pandemic. And we saw a significant uptick even just in 1 week. So I think as more people come back, as more people understand that the newer schedule really potentially works for them, we're hopeful to welcome those folks back.
Well, Steve, thanks for joining us this week on the podcast, and look forward to having you back again in the near term. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me, and please stay well.